On Easter Sunday, 1846, in Richmond, Virginia, a prayer turned into slaughter inside the wooden walls of a black church where enslaved men and women had gathered under white supervision. The pastor's sermon was cut short when a woman rose from the pews, drew a blade, and carved judgment into flesh. By the time the hymn books hit the floor, the preacher and 6 parishioners lay dead, their blood soaking into the pine boards. The church itself smelled of damp wood and sweat. It was a place tolerated by the white masters, where controlled worship was meant to pacify the enslaved. But the rafters carried other sounds, whispers of rebellion, old African hymns hidden beneath the approved psalms, and the memory of whips echoing from outside. Even in daylight, the windows sweated with mildew, the floor still stained from years of muddy boots and shackled feet. The air carried smoke from the city's chimneys, but inside it reeked of fatigue, bodies pressed together, fear mixed with devotion. Her name was Dinah, 30 years old, dark-skinned, gaunt from hunger. Her eyes burned with something beyond faith. For years she had lived under the twin terrors of slavery and sanctimony. The same pastor she now faced had baptized her with one hand and struck her with the other. He had preached humility while visiting her quarters in the dark, reminding her that God demanded obedience, even as he took what he wanted. His voice was not salvation, but violation. Dinah's wound was not a single act, it was a chain of years. Her child, fathered by that same pastor, had been sold south to pay for the church's new pulpit. Her cries meant nothing. The men of the congregation had turned away, complicit in silence, bound not only by chains, but by the terror of white retaliation. Something inside her broke the night she saw her boy's small shoes left in the dust of the yard. From that day, her prayers were no longer to the white preacher's God. They were to the God of thunder, of fire, of ancestors who demanded blood for blood. By candlelight in the slave quarters, whispers began. An old man traced circles in ash, saying the earth was restless. A girl woke from a dream of flames, swallowing the steeple. Dinah listened. She began to gather herbs from the marsh, scraps of iron filed into sharp points, anything that could wound. Each person she confided in had their own scar. A brother whipped to death, a daughter taken to a master's bed, a mother starved in the fields. In that fellowship of pain, a plan took form. Easter was chosen deliberately. The church would be full, the preacher fat with self-importance, the congregation forced to sing of resurrection. Dinah would stand among them, silent until the moment came. A blade smuggled in a Bible's hollowed spine, a vial of lye disguised as communion wine, nails scattered beneath the pews to slow escape. Nothing was random, nothing was merciful. The night before, she did not sleep. She sat in the corner of the quarters, staring at the dirt floor where so many had cried into silence. Her hands shook not from fear, but from certainty. Those around her said nothing. They simply placed their palms on hers, passing their fury like coals. By dawn, Dinah's face had changed. Her eyes no longer searched. They declared. The hymn began, voices trembling with the weight of enforced piety. He is risen, the pastor intoned. Dinah rose too. And when the knife flashed, when the pastor's words turned to screams, when the benches erupted into panic, the enslaved did not rush to stop her. Some watched, some prayed differently, some smiled for the first time in years. That Easter morning in Richmond was not salvation, it was reckoning. And it began with one woman who decided that if the church remembered her suffering, it would also remember her vengeance. On that Easter morning, the church walls became a slaughter. The wooden cross above the pulpit glistened in candlelight, but below it the pastor's body convulsed, his throat opening under Dinah's blade. His white robe, once meant to symbolize purity, turned crimson as blood soaked through the linen and dripped onto the open Bible. The congregation screamed, but few moved. The sound was not only of terror, it was recognition. For years they had prayed in silence while enduring hunger, rape, and lashes. Dinah had simply spoken the prayer that had lived inside them all. But her voice was enough. The 6 others who died that morning were not chosen at random. Dinah's fury was sharp, but her memory was sharper. Each victim had his own ledger of cruelty. Elias Brooks, the deacon with silver hair, had sold his own nephew south. After catching him, his throat was cut so clean that he fell back clutching the pew, eyes wide in disbelief, blood spraying across the hymnals. Next was Jacob Miles, a trader's assistant who had once forced Dinah to strip in front of the congregation as discipline for disobedience. He had laughed that now he tried to run. She smashed the iron spike into his spine, just below the shoulder, and he fell face first into the communion table, scattering bread and wine into the dirt. The others gasped, the symbols of Christ's body and blood mixed with his real blood, a parody of the ritual they had been forced to endure. The third was Deacon Harris, a man who had led prayers with one hand and tied the whip with the other. He begged as she approached. His voice broke into psalms, pleading for mercy. But mercy had died long ago in the cabins where he had dragged women to correct their spirit. Dinah's blow crushed his skull against the church's wooden pillar. The timber still bears the crack. 2 more men tried to flee through the narrow aisle, but nails scattered across the floor cut their feet. They slipped, their screams mixing with the cries of women clutching children. Dinah and her co-conspirators, 3 men who had waited in silence for her signal, cornered them. One wielded an axe smuggled from the carpenter's shed, another a broken chain sharpened into a blade. The aisle became a corridor of death, each swing echoing with decades of buried rage. When the last man fell, choking on his own tongue, Dinah raised her face to the rafters and shouted, not scripture but a curse. No more kneeling, no more waiting. The air reeked of iron, sweat, and smoke from candles knocked over in the struggle. Children wailed, some women fainted, but many of the enslaved stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the bodies. They had been raised to believe these men were God's chosen, shepherds of their soul. Yet here they lay twitching in their own filth, exposed as nothing but flesh that could be cut, blood that could be spilled. For the first time, the congregation saw power undone. When the killings ended, Dinah did not flee. She stood in the center of the blood-slick floor, breathing hard, her dress soaked, her eyes burning like coals. Around her, whispers began, low, careful, dangerous. An old woman muttered that she had dreamt this night, dreamt of a river of red cutting through the city. A boy no older than 10 whispered, she is the hand of the Lord. Others crossed themselves, not out of Christian faith, but out of awe. By nightfall, the church was abandoned. The bodies were left sprawled across pews, their faces frozen in terror. Word spread through Richmond's quarters faster than fire. To some, Dinah was mad. To others, she was prophecy fulfilled. For the enslaved, she was proof that even a woman beaten, scarred, ignored, could strike at the very heart of white and black authority alike. In the following nights, conspiracies multiplied. Slaves whispered at wells, in kitchens, in fields under the moon. The Easter bloodshed was a signal, a spark. An overseer who had raped a girl was found days later with his tongue cut out. A merchant rumored to have cheated black families was dragged from his wagon and beaten until his ribs broke. None admitted to doing it, but all knew the shadow behind these acts was Dinah's ghost. The white masters trembled. They posted guards at churches, fearing poison in the chalice or knives in the hymnbooks. Pastors preached longer sermons about obedience, their voices shaking with paranoia. The governor's men spoke of satanic uprisings, blaming African sorcery for the killings, but the enslaved knew better. They called it judgment. Dinah herself vanished into the swamps by the James River. Some swore she drowned herself, others that she lived as a fugitive, guided by maroons hidden in the wetlands. But her absence only fed the terror. Children whispered that she returned at night, her bloody hands touching the doors of those who collaborated with the masters. Overseers spat when her name was spoken, but their eyes darted to the shadows. The church never reopened. Its doors rotted, its pews warped in the rain, but the bloodstains on the floor darkened the wood into a permanent scar. Even now, old people in Richmond whisper about the Easter when God turned his face away, and a woman's knife took his place. And in the weeks after, the conspiracy deepened. For Dinah's strike was not the end, but the beginning. The first verse of a hymn of vengeance that others would continue to sing. Richmond, the spring of after the Easter bloodletting, the city breathed in. The church stood empty, windows black with soot from candles that had burned themselves out among corpses. Officials hurried to bury the dead, but they could not bury the memory. The enslaved carried it like fire in their lungs, while the masters carried it as a chill in their bone. The first to die after the massacre was Overseer Grafton. He had been known across 3 plantations for his cruelty, a man who enjoyed breaking bones as much as bending backs. Only a week after Easter, he rode into a field to find his horses lame. Their hooves had been packed with shards of glass. As he dismounted, 3 figures rose from the cane. One swung a hoe blade into his throat. Another struck with a hammer, shattering his jaw. Grafton's body was left nailed to the fence with his own whip wound tight around his neck. The masters found him at dawn, stiff, flies buzzing in his eyes. On the fence, someone had carved with a knife, "Dinah walks." Days later, a trader named Bellamy was found slumped in his wagon, his tongue missing. He had been the one who carried Dinah's son to the auction block. The rumor spread that she herself had returned to take his tongue so he could no longer profit from speaking prices over black bodies. Whether it was Dinah or others who acted in her name did not matter. The point was the same. Terror moved faster than chains could contain. Every killing carried a memory. When Deacon Phelps was poisoned at supper, it was not random. He had once starved whole families in the quarters, rationing cornmeal to punish them for singing after dark. He died foaming at the mouth, the taste of his own cruelty burning his throat. In the quarters, mothers said softly, "The Lord heard our hunger." By May, Richmond's masters were living like hunted men. They locked their cupboards, fearing poison. They slept with pistols under their pillows, but dreams did not protect them. The enslaved still cooked their food, cleaned their clothes, cared for their children. Every act of service became a question. Was the bread safe? Was the water clean? Was the smile hiding a knife? Suspicion rotted the households from within. At night, the enslaved gathered in the graveyards. Among sunken stones and moss-covered tombs, an old man named Josiah read omens in the dirt. He swore the ground itself shifted with the weight of the dead, demanding balance. A woman named Hester dreamt of a fire that spread from the river to the hills. Children whispered Dinah's name like a prayer, and a warning. She was no longer a woman of flesh. She had become a shadow, a myth, an answer to centuries of silence. One killing after another deepened the legend. An overseer who had branded women's faces was found in a barn, his own skin scorched with hot irons. A merchant who trafficked children south was drowned in the James River, stones tied to his feet. Witnesses swore they saw a woman's figure watching from the reeds, her eyes glowing in the moonlight. White Richmond reacted with fury and dread. Patrols doubled. Dogs were set loose in the swamps, and laws were passed forbidding slaves from gathering without white supervision. Yet none of it mattered. The killings continued, and fear spread even faster than rebellion. Every creak at night, every cough in the kitchen, every glance from a slave felt like the promise of revenge. What terrified the masters most was the silence. No one confessed, no one broke. Interrogations filled the jails, but the enslaved spoke in riddles, or not at all. "Ask the earth," one man told a constable. "It remembers more than I do." Another whispered, "The river carries her." To the authorities, it seemed like madness. To the enslaved, it was faith. By early summer, whispers became a plan. Dinah had cut the throat of the pastor, but her disciples, whether chosen or self-made, prepared to cut the throat of the system itself. Rumors spread of a night when fires would blaze across the city, when the quarters would empty, and every whip hand would be silenced. The conspirators sharpened their blades in secret, hid tools beneath floorboards, and watched the masters with eyes that no longer lowered. The killings were no longer just revenge, they were preparation. Each overseer dead meant fewer guards, each traitor silenced meant fewer bodies sold. Every act of terror shifted the balance, making the masters fear the very people they once commanded. And at the center of it all was the ghost of the church, a woman no one had seen since Easter, yet whose presence filled every silence. Some swore she was dead, her body swallowed by the swamp. Others insisted she walked among them, veiled and watchful. But all agreed on one thing: Dinah had lit a fire, and Richmond itself was becoming the fuel. The summer of 1846 was not yet the uprising, but it was the sharpening of the blade, the drawing of breath before the scream. The masters felt it in their bones, the enslaved felt it in their chains, and the city stood waiting for the next blow to fall. By midsummer of 1846, Richmond felt like a city sitting on the lip of a volcano. The killings had not stopped, but something heavier was in the air, something more than whispers, more than hidden blades. The masters no longer walked the streets at night. Doors were barred, shutters nailed, pistols polished and kept within reach. The enslaved, however, walked with new eyes. They still bent their backs in the fields, still carried trays through the halls of the rich, still bowed their heads when ordered. But beneath the obedience there was silence sharpened into steel. The plan ripened in the swamps beyond the city. Men and women stole away after dusk, following paths only maroons and hunters knew. Beneath cypress trees and clouds of gnats, they gathered. Josiah, the old man who read signs in the earth, laid out a map traced with ash and bone. "The fire begins here," he rasped, pointing to the tobacco warehouses near Shackled Bottom. "When the bells ring for night prayer, the fields will blaze, the smoke will hide us, and their eyes will burn with fear before their bodies do." They listened. They counted the rifles known to be hidden by free black carpenters, the axes borrowed from lumber yards, the knives slipped from kitchens. The women prepared poultices of lye and poison, to be poured into barrels of cider set aside for overseer. Children were given tasks too, scattering glass along the patrol roads, loosening wagon wheels, whispering false directions when asked. Nothing was wasted. Every body, every hand had and always Dinah's name returned. Some swore she had appeared in the swamp one night, face streaked with mud, hair hanging loose, her hands still marked with blood. She had not spoken, they said, only lifted a finger to the sky where thunder muttered. Then she vanished again, as if the earth swallowed her. Others argued she was gone, that her ghost walked only in dreams. Yet her absence was not weakness. It was power. Dinah had become the face of a movement that no whip could erase. The first blow of the open revolt fell in July. At the bird plantation outside Richmond, the master hosted a feast to celebrate the harvest. Candles lit the parlor, musicians tuned fiddles, overseers boasted of profits. In the kitchen, a young woman named Ruth poured a jug of cider into silver cups. She had lost 2 brothers to the auction block, and when the overseer raised his drink, she watched carefully. Within minutes, his lips frothed white, his eyes bulged, and he collapsed into the table, scattering meat and glass. Panic seized the room. Slaves dropped their trays and drew knives hidden in their aprons. 2 overseers fell to the floor with throats cut before anyone could reach for a musket. That night, the bird plantation burned. Flames rose high enough to be seen from the city, the smoke black as judgment. By dawn, only scorched beams stood, and the slaves were gone, melted into the swamps, joining the growing army beneath the trees. The fire spread faster than the authorities could contain it. In the following week, 3 more estates went up in smoke. Barns were torched, cattle slaughtered, masters dragged from their beds, and beaten to death with the same chains they had once locked around wrists. Witnesses later swore the killings were not frenzy, but ritual. Names of the dead were spoken aloud, crimes recited before the final blows. "This is not murder," Josiah declared in one gathering. "This is trial. The earth has waited too long for justice." Richmond trembled. Patrols stormed through the quarters, whipping anyone suspected of knowledge. Yet fear made them blind. Fires continued to erupt in the night. The warehouses at Shackled Bottom, heart of the city's slave trade, were found smoldering one morning. Hundreds of bales of tobacco turned to ash. Scrawled on the blackened wall in coal was a single word: The uprising did not yet become a full war, but the masters felt war pressing on their skin. The governor ordered militia companies into the streets. Church leaders preached of satanic possession and demanded stricter laws. But every sermon, every law, every musket made the fear worse. The enslaved now looked their masters in the eye when addressed, and in those eyes the masters saw something more terrifying than rage: certainty. And in the nights that followed, the visions grew strange. A girl no older than 12 told of dreaming Dinah walking through fire unharmed, her knife still dripping. A man swore he heard her voice by the river, telling him to open the throat of Babylon. In graveyards, enslaved families left food at headstones, whispering that the dead must eat before they rose again in battle. Faith and fury fused into one. By late summer, Richmond was a city under siege from within. Fires flared in the distance. Bells rang at odd hours. Gunshots echoed from the swamps. White families huddled in fear, but the enslaved gathered at night, sharpening blades, practicing signals, counting the days. The Easter massacre had been the spark, the plantation burnings the kindling. Now the city waited for the inferno itself, the moment when Richmond would drown in the blood it had fed upon for centuries. The masters asked in whispers, was Dinah alive? Was she the hand guiding these flames? No answer came, only more smoke, more bodies, more silence turned to naught. And when September drew near, the conspirators agreed. The time for scattered strikes had ended. The next blow would be a single brutal spectacle, the execution of Richmond's most powerful master, a death so public it would shake the city's foundations. The stage of reckoning had been chosen, and the gallows would not be built of wood, but of fire. The summer bled into September, and Richmond lived in dread. The killings and fires had weakened the city, but the conspirators wanted more than terror. They wanted judgment. One man in particular carried the weight of their hatred: Colonel Nathaniel Harker, one of the wealthiest planters in Virginia, a merchant of both tobacco and flesh. Harker had overseen the sale of thousands, torn families apart with the stroke of a pen, and lined his pockets with the misery of the enslaved. His name was whispered in the quarters, with more fear than Satan's, for he was said to enjoy personally choosing which child, which mother, which man would be sent south. It was decided that Harker would not die like the others. His end would be spectacle, a trial, a theater of vengeance. Preparations began in silence. Ruth, who had poisoned the overseer at Bird Plantation, worked in Harker's kitchens. She smuggled out scraps of parchment and wax impressions of keys. Josiah marked the routes of night patrols, studying when they drank, when they slept, when they grew lazy. And Hester, who had lost her daughter to Harker's greed, swore she would be the one to cut his tongue from his mouth. On the night chosen, thunder rolled across the James River. It was not storm season, but the sound of it was enough to make the enslaved murmur. Dinah is speaking again. Just after midnight, a group of 12 crept into Harker's estate. They carried axes, ropes, a branding iron stolen from the stables. Ruth unlocked the side door with the false key, and they moved like shadows through the halls. Harker was dragged from his bed, his nightshirt clinging to his sweating body. He fought, cursing, kicking, but blows from rifle butts and fists dropped him to the floor. They gagged him and carried him into the courtyard. There, under the pale moonlight, the enslaved had gathered, dozens from nearby plantations, their faces half hidden by cloth, their hands clutching tools turned into weapons. The air stank of fear and smoke, for torches lit the edges of the yard. They built no gallows. Instead, they formed a circle. Harker was thrown into the dirt at its center, his hands bound, his mouth unstuffed so he could speak. Josiah raised his voice like a preacher, though his sermon was no prayer but indictment. One by one the crimes were spoken. A boy stepped forward and shouted, "You sold my mother." A woman screamed, You branded my sister. Others added names, years, scars. The night filled with a chorus of accusation, each word heavy as a lash, each memory a chain breaking. Harker tried to defend himself, his voice trembling. I gave you food, shelter, work. But the shouts drowned him out. Ruth spat in his face. Hester raised the branding iron, heated red in the fire, and pressed it against his chest. The hiss of burning flesh silenced the crowd for a heartbeat. Harker's scream rose into the night, echoing off the house he had built on stolen bodies. The iron was pulled away, leaving the mark seared into his skin, the letter S for slave. The trial turned to sentence. He was stripped, forced to his knees. The conspirators did not rush. Each one took a turn, a strike of the whip across his back, a kick to his ribs, a fist to his jaw. When he collapsed, they pulled him upright again, demanding he hear every word. Finally, Josiah lifted the axe and declared, by the blood you spilled, by the children you sold, by the God you mocked, we sentence you. The blade fell, splitting his skull with a sound that seemed to crack more than bone. The crowd roared, not with joy but with relief. The execution was not frenzy, but ritual. His body was dragged to the manure pit behind the stables and left there uncovered, to rot where pigs would feed, his blood soaked into the earth he had claimed to own. When dawn came, smoke curled into the sky from the burning of Harker's house. His books, his ledgers, his contracts of sale, all thrown into the fire. The enslaved stood in the fields watching the flames consume the mansion. Some laughed, some wept, some simply stood silent, knowing they had crossed into a new world. News spread through Richmond by morning. White families locked their doors, trembling. They whispered that the slaves had put their master on trial like a court of devils. For the enslaved, however, it was not devilry, it was justice. The trial of Harker became a story retold in whispers. The night when the tables turned, when the master knelt before the slaves. But vengeance carried a price. Militia companies were raised. Soldiers marched into the countryside. Dogs unleashed on the swamp. Rewards were posted for Ruth, Josiah, Hester, and others. The masters demanded blood for blood, and the city prepared for war. Yet even as soldiers searched, the fire of revolt could not be quenched. For Harker's death was not the end. It was a beginning. Richmond itself had been turned into a courtroom, and the sentence was not finished. The slaves knew it, the masters feared it, and the land itself seemed to wait for the next blow. The killing of Colonel Nathaniel Harker cracked Richmond like a thunderclap. By dawn, smoke from his mansion drifted over the city, a black banner of defiance. Every master, every overseer, every merchant of flesh awoke to the truth. Their safety was an illusion. For the enslaved, the sight of that smoke was not fear. It was a signal. The walls of silence had been broken. Within days, Richmond's authorities unleashed fury. The governor's militia swept through the quarters, rifles raised, dogs snapping at chains. Whippings turned the air raw, and bodies hung from trees at the edge of fields. But no amount of terror stopped the whispers. To the enslaved, every lash, every hanging, every scar only proved the masters were afraid. Fear had shifted some. The conspirators scattered into the swamps and woods. Some, like Josiah, vanished into the night, guiding groups of fugitives along the river's hidden channels. Others, like Ruth, remained within the city, moving silently from kitchen to kitchen, stirring food for masters, while slipping messages into bread loaves for rebels. Hester, whose branding iron had seared Harker's flesh, was captured in September. She was dragged before a military tribunal, accused of witchcraft and rebellion. She spat blood into the judge's face, refusing to speak a word in her defense. At dawn, she was hanged in Capitol Square. The rope snapped her neck, but not the legend. Women in the quarters whispered that her shadow still walked home at night, holding the iron, glowing red. Meanwhile, Richmond itself became a battlefield without front lines. Fires erupted in the warehouse district. Barrels of tobacco and cotton were torched until smoke blotted out the sun. One overseer was found nailed to the door of his own barn, his blood painting the planks with a message carved above his head. Easter is not over. Soldiers patrolled with lanterns, yet still they stumbled upon fresh corpses in alleyways. The rebellion did not march. It seeped, it haunted, it bled into every shadow. And always, behind it all, the name of Dinah. Some swore she had been seen at the edge of Shackled Bottom, walking barefoot through the ashes, her knife gleaming under the moon. Others said she stood on the banks of the James River, calling spirits from the water. The white patrol claimed they fired at her in the swamps, but their bullets passed through, striking only reeds. Whether she lived or not no longer mattered. Dinah had become more than flesh. She was the ghost in the city's throat. By October, the governor's proclamations grew desperate. He declared martial law, warning that pagan insurrection threatened to destroy Christian order. Churches were fortified with guards. Ministers preached trembling sermons on obedience, their words betraying their terror. But every psalm sounded hollow now. The Easter slaughter in that Richmond church had proved that Scripture could be cut open like flesh. The rebellion reached its fever pitch on the night of October. Torches lit the sky as fires broke out in 3 directions at once. A plantation house north of the city, a warehouse near the docks, and the home of a merchant known for selling infants away from their mothers. Bells clanged, soldiers rushed, but confusion swallowed them. Amid the chaos, rebels stormed through the alleys with axes and knives. White families barricaded themselves inside, praying their doors would hold. For a brief, terrible moment, Richmond felt as if the old world had collapsed. The enslaved tasted air without chains. They ran through the burning fields, shouting names of the dead, raising their arms to the smoke. But the soldiers came. Muskets cracked, horses thundered, and blood soaked into the soil. Many rebels fell in those hours, their bodies left hanging as warning. Josiah was shot while leading a group toward the river. Ruth was captured alive, dragged through the streets, and burned in front of the courthouse as the city watched. Yet even as their bodies burned, the legend only grew. Mothers told their children that Ruth's ashes rose into the night sky, carried by the wind. Old men whispered that Josiah's blood turned the river red, and it would never run clean again. By winter, the revolt had been broken on the surface. Patrols tight, survivors were executed, sold or vanished into the swamps. Richmond's masters declared victory, but their voices shook, for though they had bodies, they had no peace. Every creak in the night, every whisper in the fields, every sudden silence in the kitchens made them flinch, because the church still stood. Its doors rotted, its windows shattered, but the floor inside was still dark with blood. The masters avoided it. The enslaved sometimes passed by, leaving stones or scraps of cloth at the threshold, as if feeding the memory. They called it the house where God turned his face. Others called it Dinah's altar, and so her name survived, not in books, those burned or buried her, but in breath, in dirt, in dreams. Dinah, the woman who struck at the pulpit. Dinah, who put masters on trial. Dinah, who walked from the swamp like a ghost with fire in her hands. The rebellion had cost lives, but to those who survived, death was better than silence. The earth remembered, the children remembered, and Richmond, no matter how it tried, could never wash away Easter's blood. For the story lived on not as history, but as haunting, and every whisper of her name promised the same truth. The struggle was not ended. It had only begun.